What would make a desperate cowboy try to sell the one thing that once saved his life? In a dying corner of Wyoming, a man on the edge of losing everything leads his last horse to auction, convinced it's the only way to survive the coming winter. But just as the deal is about to be made, a quiet native woman steps forward, and what she says stops him cold. Because this isn't just about a horse. It's about a truth he's been running from. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. Stay with us, because what happens next will change everything. The morning broke cold and gray over Red Creek, Wyoming. And the kind of morning that carried no promise, only a dull weight that pressed against the land and everything living on it. Frost clung to the edges of the broken fence posts, and a thin wind slipped through the gaps in the old ranch house like it had every right to be there. Inside that house, Ethan Cole stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the table as if it might offer him something it no longer could. The wood beneath his hands was worn smooth from years of use from his father's hands, before his from meals shared and plans made when the ranch had still meant something. Now the table held only papers. A bank notice stamped in red, a stack of unpaid bills for cattle feed, a letter informing him that if he failed to make payment within the next few days, the property would be seized. The words blurred together after a while, but the meaning stayed sharp. This ranch had once been the pride of the Cole family. There had been a time when men rode miles just to see the herd his father raised when neighbors spoke his name with respect. Now what remained was a skeleton of that life. The barn leaned slightly to one side. The eastern fence lay broken in places where Ethan had not had the time or materials to repair it. The grain store was nearly empty. A handful of cattle wandered the pasture ribs, visible beneath dull coats. And this house felt colder than it ever had, not because of the weather, but because the man who had filled it with quiet strength was gone. Ethan had not failed for lack of trying. He had worked through the worst of the drought, waking before sunrise and working past dark, patching fences, hauling water, trying to keep the land alive. He had borrowed money when he had to sold off cattle one by one, held on longer than most would have. But each effort seemed to pull him deeper into something he could not climb out of. And that morning, standing in the cold kitchen, he finally understood the truth he had been avoiding. If he did not find money within days, the bank would take everything that was left. He stepped outside into the thin morning light and made his way to the barn. Inside there was only one stall still in use. Dusty lifted her head as he entered. The mare's coat, a deep reddish brown, caught what little light filtered through the cracks in the barn wall. She was not as young as she once had been, but she stood steady, her posture still carrying the quiet strength he had always known. Her ears flicked toward him, and her eyes, clear alert, followed his every movement. She was the last horse he had, the last thing his father had ever given him. Ethan remembered the day clearly. Dusty had still been a colt, then nervous and restless, dancing in the yard while his father held the reins. His father had placed them in Ethan's hands and said, "A man can lose money. He can lose land. He can lose his luck. But he should never lose the horse that knows how to bring him home." At the time, Ethan had taken it as just another piece of advice from a man who did not waste words. Now it echoed differently. Dusty had been with him through everything. Through long cattle drives across the valley. Through nights when the wind howled so hard it felt like it might tear the world apart. Through a blizzard that had nearly taken his life years ago, when he had lost direction in the white and trusted her to carry him back. She had found the way when he could not. She always had. That was why this hurt more than anything else. Because Dusty was not just a horse. She was the last piece of his father, still alive in the world. The last piece of the ranch that had not given up. The last piece of the man Ethan used to believe he was. He rested a hand against her neck, feeling the warmth beneath her coat. For a moment, he almost let himself stay there. But then the image of the papers on the kitchen table pushed back in, heavy and unavoidable. There was no feed left for long. Winter was coming, and memories did not keep anything alive. "I'm sorry," he muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or to himself. He went to the tack wall and took down the old saddle. It had been his father's. The leather was worn, the stitching patched in places where Ethan had tried to keep it together. When he lifted it onto Dusty's back, his hands trembled slightly. Dusty did not resist. She did not step away or toss her head. She only turned it slowly and looked at him. There was something in that look that made him turn away first. He tightened the strap, his jaw set. "You don't need to look back," he said under his breath. "There's nothing left here." But the words didn't sound right, even as he said them. He led her out of the barn, and the door creaking behind them like it was reluctant to close. In the yard, Dusty stopped. She turned her head again, looking toward the house of the barn and the broken fence stretching out across the land. For a long moment, she did not move. Ethan pulled on the reins a little harder than necessary. "Come on," he said. "Don't start that." They reached the dirt road that led toward Red Creek, and the ranch began to fall behind them. Dusty walked at his side, but every few minutes she slowed, glancing back, letting out a soft, uncertain whinny as if asking a question he refused to answer. Each time Ethan's irritation grew. But beneath that irritation was something else. Something heavier. He remembered his father's words again, about the horse that knew how to bring a man home. Ethan forced the thought away. Dead men didn't need horses. Dead land didn't need cowboys. And a man who couldn't feed himself had no right to hold on to what he couldn't keep. Dusty kept walking, slow, steady, loyal, just as she always had. By the time they reached the Red Creek auction yard, the sky had turned a dull, overcast gray. Wind pushed dust through the open space between the old wooden pens, rattling loose boards and stirring the smell of animals and hay into the air. The place was busy. Buyers moved from pen to pen, inspecting horses with quick, practiced eyes. Ranchers stood in small groups, talking low. Traders leaned against rails, calculating value in silence. No one here looked at animals the way Ethan did. They saw weight muscle price. Nothing more. Ethan felt out of place the moment he stepped inside. Dusty stayed close to him, her ears flicking, her gaze moving over the crowd. It didn't take long for someone to notice them. Caleb Turner approached with the confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was looking at and how much he intended to pay for it. His coat was cleaner than most in the yard, his boots polished, his eyes sharp and cold as they ran over Dusty. "Well," Caleb said, "what have we got here?" Ethan said nothing at first. Caleb stepped closer, examining the mare like she was already his. "She's older than you think," he added casually. "Looks tired. Might not last the season." Ethan knew that wasn't true. But knowing and proving were not the same thing. "And you?" Caleb continued, his eyes shifting to Ethan. "Look like you need money." He named a price. It was low, insultingly low. Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's worth more than that." Caleb shrugged. "Maybe once. Not now." Before Ethan could respond, a boy's voice spoke up from behind the rail. "She's not looking at him," the boy said quietly. Ethan turned. The boy Tommy, he'd heard someone call him earlier, stood there with dirt on his face and hay clinging to his sleeves. He wasn't looking at Caleb. He was watching Dusty. "She's looking at you," Tommy added. "Like she's waiting for you to change your mind." Ethan felt something twist in his chest. "That's not your business," he said, sharper than he meant to. Tommy looked down, but he didn't step away. Caleb snorted softly. Kid doesn't know what he's talking about. He reached out toward Dusty. The reaction was instant. Dusty jerked back, letting out a sharp, loud whinny that cut through the noise of the yard. She pulled hard against the reins, nearly dragging Ethan off balance. People stepped back, startled. "See?" Caleb said loudly. "That's what I'm talking about. Unpredictable, not worth the trouble." He lowered his offer. Again. Ethan felt the eyes of the crowd on him now, the murmurs, the judgment. For a moment, he almost gave in. And then from the edge of the crowd, a woman's voice spoke. "She's not unpredictable." The words weren't loud, but they carried. Ethan turned. Ayanna Red Sky stepped forward slowly, the crowd parting just enough to let her pass. She wore a worn leather coat gloves that had seen years of use and walked beside a small black horse that moved with quiet ease. Her expression was calm, her gaze steady, not on Caleb, not on the crowd, on Dusty. She stopped a few feet away, studying the mare with careful attention. The way Dusty held her head, the way her breath came, the way she avoided Caleb but stayed near Ethan. Ayanna did not rush. She simply observed. Then she said, "She's not going mad." A pause, and then clearly, "She's warning you." Was selling the horse the right move or the biggest mistake he was about to make? And why did the native woman say the horse wasn't broken, but trying to warn him? Tell us what you think, and don't forget to subscribe before we step into the most intense part of the story. The yard fell into a strange, suspended silence after Ayanna's words. Dusty's breath still came fast, her body tense beneath the worn saddle. But the chaos that had filled the auction moments earlier seemed to hesitate, as if unsure which direction to move next. Every eye shifted between the mare, the quiet native woman standing beside her, and Ethan Cole caught in the middle of something he had not asked for, but could no longer ignore. Ethan tightened his grip on the reins. He could feel the weight of the crowd pressing in on him, the murmur of judgment that always came when a man showed weakness in a place like this. And now, worse than that, his private failure, his desperation, his last decision had been dragged out into the open by a stranger. "This is my horse," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "And this is my business. I don't need anyone stepping in." A few men in the crowd nodded as if that settled it. Caleb Turner let out a low chuckle beside him, the sound smooth and practiced. "Hear that," he said, glancing at the others. "Man knows what he's doing. No need for stories." But Ayanna did not react to either of them. She did not step back. She did not raise her voice. She simply shifted her gaze from Dusty to Ethan, holding it steady, unhurried. "It's exactly because she's your horse," she said calmly, "that she's still trying to save you." The words landed harder than anything Caleb had said all morning. Ethan's jaw tightened, but for a moment, just a moment, he didn't answer. Dusty shifted beside him, ears pinned tight, her body still angled away from Caleb. Her eyes never left the man. Ayanna tilted her head slightly. "If you truly know your horse," she added, "you should ask yourself why she only reacts like this when he comes near." Caleb scoffed, but he didn't step closer again. Ethan swallowed, irritation rising again to cover something deeper. "You think you know my horse better than I do." "I think your horse is telling you something," Ayanna replied. "And you're choosing not to hear it." The crowd leaned in closer, drawn now not by the sale but by the tension building between them. After a long second, Ethan exhaled sharply. "Fine," he said. "You want to prove she's not dangerous? Go ahead." He gestured slightly, though his grip on the reins remained tight. Ayanna nodded once. She approached Dusty slowly, so slowly that it almost didn't look like movement at all. Each step was measured, deliberate. She didn't reach out. She didn't fix her eyes on the mare's face. Her hands remained low at her sides. Her posture relaxed, her voice quiet, as she spoke not to command, but to reassure. "It's all right," she murmured. "I see you." Dusty shifted back half a step. Ayanna stopped immediately. She did not close the distance again. She simply stood there waiting. The difference was subtle, but it was there. When Caleb had reached for Dusty, it had been quick, certain claiming. When Ayanna moved, it was with permission. The mare's breathing began to slow. The tension in her neck eased slightly. Her ears flicked uncertain now, no longer pinned in warning. The yard had gone completely silent. Even Caleb, visibly irritated, held back. He folded his arms, his expression tightening, as he watched the scene unfold in a way he could not control. Ayanna waited until Dusty lowered her head. Only then did she raise one hand, palm turned slightly, letting the mare move first. Dusty stretched her nose forward, sniffing cautiously. For a second, nothing happened. Then she exhaled. Ayanna let her fingers brush lightly against Dusty's neck. No sudden movement. No resistance. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. If Dusty had truly gone bad, if she were dangerous, she would not allow this. She would not stand still. She would not calm under a stranger's hand. "She's not trying to hurt anyone," Ayanna said softly, her hand still resting against the mare's neck. "She's trying to tell you something you're refusing to see." Ethan frowned. "Then what is it?" Instead of answering directly, Ayanna began to look more closely. Her hand moved along Dusty's neck, parting the thick hair just enough to reveal the skin beneath. Her brow furrowed slightly. "Hold her steady," she said. Ethan adjusted his grip without thinking. "There," Ayanna murmured. She brushed the hair aside again, revealing a faint line pressed into the skin. It was thin, easy to miss. But it wasn't right. "That's not from a bridle," she said. Ethan stepped closer. "What do you mean?" "It's too sharp," Ayanna replied. "Too tight, like something was pulled hard. And recently." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Caleb stepped forward half a pace. "That's nothing. Horses get marks all the time." Ayanna didn't look at him. She had already moved to Dusty's shoulder, then down toward her hind leg. The moment her hand neared the back hoof, Dusty flinched sharply. Ethan blinked. "She doesn't do that." "When did she start acting restless?" Ayanna asked. Ethan hesitated. Then the memory came back uninvited. "Last night," he admitted slowly. "She kept kicking the stall, wouldn't settle. Kept looking toward the grain shed." "Did you check?" "I did," he said. "Didn't see anything." "Did you hear anything?" A pause. "Maybe," Ethan said. "Thought it was the wind." Ayanna nodded slightly, as if the answer confirmed something she had already suspected. She crouched down carefully, lifting Dusty's hoof just enough to inspect it. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she reached in with her fingers and pulled something free. A small piece of metal. A shard. Not large, but sharp. Dusty shifted again, as if relieved. Ethan stared at it. That was in her hoof. Ayanna held it up, long enough to make every step hurt. Caleb's voice cut in quickly. "Horses pick up debris all the time." "That's not from the road," Ayanna said flatly. Now she did look at him. It's shaped, clean, like it was broken off something man-made. The yard went quiet again. Ethan felt the ground tilt slightly beneath him. "She's been limping," he said slowly. "This morning. I thought she was just resisting." "No," Ayanna said. "She was in pain." The words hit harder than anything else. Ethan looked at Dusty, really looked this time. At the tension in her stance, the way she favored her weight, the way she had tried to stop again and again on the road, and how he had dragged her forward anyway. Guilt replaced the anger in his chest. Caleb took a step forward, voice rising. "This is ridiculous. You're letting her spin a story Ayanna didn't argue." She turned back to Ethan. "Who benefits," she asked quietly, "if your horse looks weak right before you sell her?" Ethan's eyes shifted to Caleb. The trader held his gaze expression hard. "You think I'd waste time hurting a half-dead mare," Caleb snapped. But something in his tone had changed. Ethan's thoughts began to piece together. The restless night, the noise by the barn, the damaged feed, the sudden appearance of Caleb already ready with a price. Too ready. Before he could speak, he felt a small tug at his sleeve. "Tommy, come here," the boy whispered. Ethan hesitated, then followed him a few steps behind the row of pens. Tommy glanced over his shoulder before speaking again. "I didn't want to say anything earlier," he said, voice low. "But a couple nights ago, I saw 2 men near your place." Ethan's stomach tightened. "What men worked for him?" Tommy said, nodding subtly toward Caleb. "I've seen them before. One of them's got boots with iron studs on the heel." Ethan's breath slowed. "They weren't heading to town," Tommy added. "They turned off toward your barn. Why didn't you say something?" Tommy swallowed. "You don't cross him. Not if you want to keep working or stay around." Ethan straightened slowly. Now the pieces fit too well. When he walked back toward the center of the yard, everything felt different. Caleb was no longer just a buyer. He was a man who had seen Ethan's desperation coming and helped create it. Ayanna stepped closer as Ethan returned. He told her quickly what Tommy had said. She nodded, not surprised. "I've seen this before," she said. "Not just here. Other ranches. Same pattern." Ethan frowned. "What pattern?" "Small failures," she said. "Things that don't make sense. Broken fences, sick animals, spoiled feed. Then someone arrives with an offer. Just in time." Ethan thought of the bank notices, the pressure, the timing. "They don't just buy land," Ayanna continued. "They buy the moment a man believes he has nothing left worth keeping." Ethan looked at Dusty, then at the money. Caleb now held out again. The trader's patience was gone. "Enough of this," Caleb said sharply. "You want to listen to stories, or you want to eat this winter?" He held the bills up, counting them slowly, deliberately. "This is real," he said. "Pride isn't." The crowd fell silent again. Ethan stared at the money. It was enough to breathe, enough to last a few weeks, enough to delay the inevitable. But suddenly, it felt like something else. A trap. Behind him, Tommy said nothing, but his eyes said everything. Beside him, Ayanna didn't reach out, didn't stop him. She simply spoke, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "She carried you through a storm once," she said. "Don't hand her to the man who brought one to your door." The memory hit him hard. Snow, wind, darkness. Dusty moving beneath him when he could no longer see. Bringing him home. Ethan exhaled slowly. Then, without another word, he placed the money back into Caleb's hand. "I'm not selling her." For a moment, Caleb didn't react. Then his face hardened. "You'll lose everything," he said coldly. Maybe Ethan replied. But not this. A murmur spread through the crowd. Something had shifted. Caleb saw it and hated it. Old Man Briggs stepped forward from the office, voice firm. "That's enough. No more pressure deals on my yard." Caleb glared, but he backed off. As he turned away, he leaned close to Ethan. "You just bought yourself a harder winter," he muttered. Ethan didn't answer. He crouched instead, checking Dusty's hoof as Ayanna wrapped it carefully. Tommy brought water. No one laughed now. No one mocked. When Ethan led Dusty out of the yard, the crowd parted quietly. Ayanna walked beside him for a while. "Thank you," Ethan said. "This isn't over," she replied. He looked at her. "If they touched your horse," she said, "they touched your land." Ethan's grip tightened on the reins. "You need to go back," she added. "Now." He looked down the road toward his ranch. And for the first time that day, it didn't feel like the road to failure. It felt like the place he needed to return to and fight for. They left the Red Creek auction yard before the last of the lights slipped behind the hills, but the road back felt nothing like the one Ethan had ridden that morning. Then he had carried defeat with him, heavy, dull, almost familiar. Now something else rode beside him. Not relief, not yet. It was sharper than that, uneasy, alert, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air shifts and something unseen begins to move. Dusty limped under him, her injured hoof slowing her stride, but she kept pressing forward faster than she should have been able to manage. Every few minutes, her head-lifted ears pricked hard toward the distant outline of the ranch. Her breathing was uneven, restless. "She knows," Ayanna said quietly, riding just ahead on her black horse. Ethan glanced at her. "Knows what that something is wrong," she replied. "Something she's felt before." Behind them, Tommy rode stiffly, glancing back over his shoulder more often than forward. "You think they followed us?" he asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I don't think we were ever meant to leave that place without them noticing." The ranch came into view just as the sky turned a deep, fading gray. At first glance, nothing seemed different. But the silence was wrong. There were no low calls from the cattle, no loose door creaking in the wind, no ordinary familiar sounds that should have been there. Dusty suddenly let out a sharp, urgent whinny. Ethan swung down before she fully stopped. The moment his boots hit the ground, Dusty pulled hard toward the grain shed. "Easy," he muttered, but he followed. The door to the shed hung slightly open. The lock dangled bent and broken. Ethan's stomach tightened. "I locked this," he said. He pushed the door open. The smell hit him first. Rot, damp earth, something sour beneath it all. The inside of the shed was a mess. Feed sacks lay split open, their contents spilled across the floor. Hay had been dragged down and scattered. Mud streaked through the grain, dark and thick, mixed deliberately. Tommy stepped in behind him and stopped short. That's not animals," he said. "That's done on purpose." Ayanna crouched, scooping up a handful of the ruined feed. She brought it close to her face, inhaled once, then dropped it immediately. If she kept eating this, she said she would weaken slowly, lose strength, stop standing. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "She would have looked like she was dying," he said. Ayanna nodded. "And you would have believed it." The truth settled over him, heavy and cold. He had believed it. He had seen Dusty slow, seen her hesitate, and thought it was age. Hunger, failure, not sabotage. Not this. Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't just want to buy her cheap, he said quietly. "No," Ayanna replied. "He wanted you to believe she was already worthless." Ethan turned and stepped back outside, the cold air cutting through him. He moved around the side of the shed, scanning the ground. Near the water trough, the earth was soft or damp enough to hold a shape. He crouched. Boot prints. Several of them. One stood out more than the rest. Deeper. Sharper. The heel carried a distinct mark, an iron stud shaped like a hook. Tommy leaned over his shoulder. "That's it," he said quickly. "I've seen that. One of Caleb's men wears boots like that, always clicking when he walks." Ethan pressed his hand into the print, his expression darkening. "How recent?" he asked. Ayanna stepped closer, studying it. "Hours," she said. "Not more." Ethan straightened slowly. "They came while I was gone." He looked back toward the house, toward the barn, toward the land stretching east. "They knew exactly when I'd be at the auction. And what you'd bring with you," Ayanna added. Ethan nodded once, grim. "They heard her before I left. Waited for me to take her in. Tried to force the sale." He paused. "And while I was gone, they came here." Tommy frowned. "But why go that far, just for one horse?" Ayanna didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked past the buildings, toward the dry eastern field. Dusty stood there now, her body angled toward it again, ears forward despite the pain. "There's more here than a horse," Ayanna said finally. Ethan turned toward the house. "Come on." Inside, the air felt colder than it had that morning. He moved straight to the old desk in the corner, the one his father had used for years. Papers were scattered where he had left them. The debt notices, the land documents. He checked them quickly. Still there. But something else caught his attention. One of the drawers sat slightly out of place. Ethan pulled it open, then frowned. The wood at the back had shifted slightly, just enough to reveal a narrow gap. He reached in. His fingers brushed something thin. Paper. He pulled it out carefully. An envelope yellowed with age. His name written across the front. In his father's hand. Ethan's breath caught. He turned it over slowly. It had never been sealed. Never sent. He opened it. The paper inside was brittle, but the writing was clear. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to say it myself. Years ago, I had a surveyor pass through the eastern land. He told me something I didn't fully understand at the time. Said there was water beneath it. Not a stream you can see, but something deeper. Running under the clay. I meant to dig. To prove it. But I ran out of time. If the day comes when you think this land is dead, don't trust that feeling too quickly. Watch where the horses linger. Watch where the grass comes back first after a dry season. There's a place east field near the 3 cottonwoods by the dry cut. That's where he said to start. Don't give it up before you know what it is." Your father, Ethan, lowered the paper slowly. His mind raced. Dusty. The times she had wandered to the eastern field. The way she had pawed at the ground. Stood there longer than anywhere else. He had thought she was restless. Stubborn. Now she knew, he whispered. Ayanna stepped closer. "What is it?" Ethan handed her the letter. She read it quickly, her expression tightening with understanding. "If this is true," she said, "this land isn't worthless." Ethan shook his head slowly. "No, it's not." His gaze hardened. "And if Caleb knows it, he doesn't want your horse," Ayanna finished. "He wants this land." Ethan folded the letter carefully and slipped it inside his coat. For a long moment he stood there, letting the truth settle. All the strange things. The broken fence. The spoiled feed. The sudden pressure from the bank. It wasn't bad luck. It was design. "They needed me to believe it was over," he said. Ayanna nodded. "You can't force a man to sell what he still believes in. So you make him stop believing first." Ethan thought of that morning, of the words he had said. "There's nothing left here." The memory hit like a blade. It hadn't been true. He just hadn't seen it anymore. Outside, the wind shifted. The temperature dropped fast. Ayanna looked toward the door. They'll come back. Ethan met her eyes. You think so if they didn't find what they wanted, she said. They won't leave it unfinished. Snow began to fall. Light at first, then faster. They moved quickly. Ethan secured the barn doors as best he could. Ayanna gathered what clean feed remained and covered it. The letter was placed inside a small tin box and hidden beneath a loose board in the kitchen floor. Tommy hovered near the window, trying to stay brave. You don't have to stay, Ethan told him. Tommy shook his head. I'm not leaving now. Ethan nodded once. He took his father's rifle down from the wall, checked the chamber. Ayanna tightened the strap on her knife and lifted a lantern. No one spoke much after that. The storm swallowed the ranch, cutting it off from everything beyond its borders. And in the rising wind, Dusty let out a low warning sound. This time Ethan listened. It was some time past midnight when the warning came again. Louder. Dusty slammed against the stall door. Ethan was awake instantly. He moved to the window and wiped a clear space through the frost. 3 shapes moved through the snow. 1 in front, 2 behind. Caleb. Get up, Ethan said. Ayanna was already moving. They're here, she said. Tommy's face went pale. Out the back, Ayanna told him, if you get the chance, ride for Briggs. Tommy hesitated, then nodded. Outside, the figures moved quickly toward the barn and house. One carried a lantern, another held a bundle of tools. They're not here to talk, Ethan muttered. Dusty kicked again hard. The stall door cracked, then broke. She burst into the yard, limping but fierce, her whinny cutting through the storm. Damn it, Caleb snapped. They're awake. He changed direction immediately, heading for the house. Ethan stepped out to meet him. Snow whipped between them. Caleb stopped a few feet away, eyes cold. You should have taken the money, he said. You should have stayed off my land, Ethan replied. Behind them, Ayanna intercepted one of the men's ropes, snapping tight as she forced him back. The third stumbled as Dusty charged past, knocking into him. The lantern fell. Glass shattered. Flame hit dry straw. Fire leapt up instantly. The wind took it. Within seconds, the side of the barn was burning. Ethan turned, and in that moment, Caleb drew his gun. Time slowed. Ethan saw the movement. Too late to react. Then Dusty moved. She stepped between them. The shot rang out. The bullet grazed her shoulder. She cried out, but did not fall. Ethan's vision went red. He lunged. The gun went wide. They hit the ground hard, struggling in the snow and mud. Ethan struck once, twice. The weapon slipped free. Caleb went down. Ayanna was there in seconds, binding his hands tight. But the fire of the barn was fully burning now. Inside Dusty, Ethan breathed. Without another thought, he pulled his scarf over his mouth and ran into the smoke. The heat hit him like a wall. Inside, everything was chaos, crackling wood, thick, black smoke. Dusty, he shouted. She answered weakly. He moved toward the sound, coughing eyes burning. There, her shape unsteady. He grabbed the strap, pulling. A beam crashed down nearby. He stumbled, and Dusty shoved him clear. Come on, he rasped. I'm not leaving you again. Step by step, they fought their way out. They burst through the smoke together, both collapsing into the snow. Ethan clung to her neck, coughing hard. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. I'm sorry. Dusty's breathing was rough, but steady. She was alive. And by dawn, the truth was no longer hidden. Tommy returned with Briggs and others. They saw the fire, the damage, the bound men. And as Ethan showed them the prints, the metal shard, the ruined feed, the letter stories began to surface. One rancher stepped forward. "Same thing happened to me last spring." Another nodded. "Lost 3 head before they came with an offer. Piece by piece it came together. Not accidents. A system." Caleb stood silent now, his control gone. When the sheriff arrived, he was taken without protest. And as the sun rose over the scorched but standing ranch, Ethan stood beside Dusty, beside Ayanna. And for the first time in months, he didn't see ruin. He saw something that had survived, and something worth fighting for. The days after Caleb was taken away did not bring peace, not the kind Ethan used to imagine. The ranch was quiet again, but it was a different silence now. Not empty, not defeated, just scarred. One side of the barn stood blackened where the fire had eaten through wood and memory alike. The grain shed still smelled of rot even after they cleared most of it out. The yard held traces of everything that had happened, boot prints frozen into the mud ash scattered across the snow, and faint dried streaks of blood where Dusty had stood that night. Ethan barely left her side. Each morning, before the sun fully rose, he was already in the stall. He cleaned the wound on her shoulder carefully, his hands steady now, in a way they hadn't been before. He changed the bandages, checked her breathing, ran his hand down her legs to make sure the swelling hadn't worsened. At night, he slept on a thin blanket near the stall door. Sometimes, he didn't sleep at all. Every shift in her breathing pulled him awake. Every small movement had him sitting up listening. He no longer saw her as something he had to give up. He saw her as the one thing that had refused to give up on him. More than once he found himself replaying that morning at the auction, the moment he had almost let her go. The memory no longer came with defensiveness. It came with shame. "I thought you were making everything harder," he murmured one night, resting his forehead lightly against her neck. "But you were the only one trying to make me see." Dusty exhaled slowly, her breath warm against the cold air. Ayanna stayed. She never made a declaration about it. She simply didn't leave. Each day she worked beside Ethan with quiet focus. She treated Dusty with a mix of practiced skill and instinct, cleaning the wound with warm water infused with herbs, pressing gently around the injured hoof, to ease the swelling, speaking softly when the pain made Dusty restless. "She'll heal," Ayanna said once, tying a fresh bandage. "But not if she feels you're unsure." Ethan looked at her. Unsure of what? Of whether she still belongs here? Ethan shook his head. "She does. I just forgot how to act like it." Tommy helped wherever he could. He carried water-replaced straw, learned how to wrap a bandage without making it too tight. His hands were clumsy at first, but he paid attention. Listened, improved. In the quiet of the barn, the 3 of them, once strangers, began to move, like something closer to a team. One night after Dusty had finally settled into steady sleep, Ethan and Ayanna sat just outside the stall. The lantern light flickered between them. Ethan hesitated before speaking. "Why did you stay?" Ayanna didn't answer immediately. "You could have walked away after the auction," he continued. "After all of it. You didn't have to come back here. You didn't have to face Caleb." Ayanna stared into the dim light for a moment, then said quietly, "My family lost land once." Ethan didn't interrupt. "It didn't happen all at once," she went on. "No one rode in and took it by force. It was slower than that. Debts, bad seasons, small things going wrong at the worst possible time." She paused. "My father thought he made the choice to sell. Thought it was the only option left." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "But it wasn't," she said. "They built the situation around him. Made it look like there was no way out." She turned to look at Ethan. "The worst part wasn't losing the land," she said. "It was watching him believe it had no value anymore. watching him stop fighting for something that was still his. Silence settled between them. Ethan stared down at his hands. "I thought I was selling Dusty because I had no choice," he admitted. Ayanna shook her head gently. "You were selling her because you couldn't stand what she reminded you of." Ethan let out a slow breath. "That I failed. That you used to believe you wouldn't." For the first time, the words didn't hit like a wound. They felt like something being set straight. The next morning, Ethan unfolded his father's letter again. This time he didn't read it like evidence. He read it like a voice. He made his decision before he reached the end. "I'm not selling," he said aloud. Not Dusty, not the ranch, not the life he had almost walked away from. He began writing that same day. A formal complaint, every detail documented. The metal shard from Dusty's hoof, the damaged grain, the footprints, the night attack, Tommy's testimony, the stories of other ranchers. Briggs helped him carry it forward, connecting him with others willing to speak. Tommy didn't hesitate when Ethan offered him a place to stay. "I'm not going back," the boy said simply. "Not after this." Ethan nodded. "Then you've got work to do?" When he turned to Ayanna, his tone shifted. "If you stay," he said, "it won't be as a favor. You'll be paid. You'll have a say in what we build here." Ayanna studied him for a long moment. Then she looked out toward the eastern field. "I'll stay," she said, "until this land doesn't need me anymore." That was answer enough. The weeks that followed were hard. Not dramatic, not heroic, just hard. They rebuilt the damaged side of the barn piece by piece, cleared out ruined feed, repaired fencing where it had been cut. Tommy learned to drive posts straight and stretch wire tight. Ayanna walked the land like she was reading a language Ethan had never been taught. She studied the wind, the soil, the way certain patches of grass clung to life longer than others. Ethan began digging in the eastern field. At first it felt like digging into doubt, dry soil, hard stone, sweat and frustration. More than once he leaned on the shovel, staring down at nothing but dust. "Maybe it's not there," he muttered one afternoon. Ayanna didn't look up. "Or maybe you stopped too soon before." Dusty stood nearby, watching. Every time Ethan slowed, she drifted closer to that same spot, ears forward, still patient. "She knows something," Tommy said once. Ethan wiped his brow. "Yeah," he replied. "She always did." Then, one cold afternoon, something changed. Tommy struck a patch of soil that didn't sound the same. "Hey," he said, "this feels different." Ethan knelt, brushing the dirt aside with his hands. The colors shifted beneath the surface, darker, damp. His breath caught. He dug faster now, ignoring the cold biting into his fingers. A thin line of moisture appeared, then another, then water. Not much at first, just a seep. But it grew. A slow, steady trickle pushing through the soil. Ethan sank back onto his knees, staring at it. For a moment, he couldn't speak. All the months he had believed this land was dead. All the times he had stood here and seen nothing. "It was here," he whispered. "The whole time." Ayanna stood beside him, quiet. Tommy laughed loud and bright. "We found it." Dusty walked over, slowly lowering her head to the damp earth. Ethan reached out, resting his hand on her neck. "You knew," he said softly, "and with that water, everything began to change. Not overnight, but steadily. They dug channels, redirected flow, let the moisture spread where it could. Other ranchers came to help men who had once stood silent, now stepping forward. Some brought tools, others brought seed, some just brought time. Briggs lent Ethan a young horse to work with, while Dusty healed. Ethan was grateful, but he never rode it the way he had once ridden Dusty. Winter came hard, cold nights, thin supplies, long days. But Ethan was no longer alone. Ayanna sat by the fire in the evenings, repairing gear or marking notes about the land. Tommy collapsed into sleep each night, exhausted but satisfied. Dusty grew stronger. Slowly, surely. The ranch did not look rich, but it no longer looked like it was dying. It looked like something learning to breathe again. The bond between Ethan and Ayanna changed too. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It grew in quiet ways. Shared work, shared silence. A look held a second longer than before. A hand brushing against another without pulling away too quickly. They never rushed to name it. They didn't need to. It was there, like water under dry ground, unseen at first, but undeniable once found. Near the end of winter, Ethan opened the gate to the eastern field. Dusty stood at the threshold, hesitant for only a moment. Then she stepped forward. One step, another. Then she lifted her head and ran. Not far, not fast, but free. Ethan stood still, watching her move across the field, her coat catching the low sunlight. Every memory rushed back at once. His father's hand placing the reins in his. The blizzard that should have taken him. The auction yard. The gunshot. The moment she stepped between him and death. She never ended, Ayanna said quietly beside him. Ethan nodded slowly. Maybe I didn't either, he replied. Years passed after that first spring, and Red Creek Ranch slowly became the kind of place men stopped riding past and started riding toward. It did not happen all at once. There was no single morning when the land suddenly changed its face. It came back the way living things often do, quietly, stubbornly, one season at a time. The eastern field was the first to show it. The underground water Ethan, Ayanna, and Tommy had uncovered never became a roaring river, but it did not need to. It ran steady beneath the soil, and with careful work, hand-dug channels, stone-lined cuts, and wooden gates built from whatever they could spare, they guided it where the grass needed it most. By the third year, that field held green, longer than any other stretch of land near Red Creek. By the fourth, the cattle were strong enough to sell again. By the fifth, men who once looked at Ethan with pity began asking him how he had done it. Ethan Cole was no longer the broke cowboy at the auction yard, standing with dust on his coat and shame in his throat. He was respected now, not because he had become rich, though the ranch was earning again, not because he had beaten Caleb Turner, though people remembered that. He was respected because he had stayed rebuilt and made the land live without stripping it bare. Tommy had grown into a broad-shouldered young man with steady hands and a sharper eye than he gave himself credit for. He was no longer the frightened stable boy who whispered warnings behind auction pens. He was Ethan's right hand, trusted with horses, cattle water lines, and men twice his age when they came asking for work. Ayanna remained at Red Creek too. She never called the ranch hers in the way paperwork did, but everyone who knew the place understood that her hand was in everything living there. She read the land better than any surveyor knew when to open water and when to hold it back, when the grass needed rest, when the horses sensed trouble before men did. If Ethan was the man who had chosen to stay, Ayanna was the one who had taught him how to listen, and Dusty, older now, moved more slowly. Her reddish-brown coat had lightened around the face. Her once powerful stride had shortened. She no longer worked cattle except on soft days when the sun was kind and Ethan felt her asking. But she was never treated like an animal whose usefulness had passed. Dusty stood at the heart of Red Creek Ranch. Every new hand learned her name before learning the layout of the barns. Every child in the valley knew the story of the mare that had been almost sold then, had saved a man a ranch, and maybe more than that, People began calling Red Creek the ranch that came back from the dead. And that kind of story travels. By the 5th year, men in better coats began arriving. They did not come like Caleb had. They did not sneer at Ethan's poverty or try to humiliate him before a crowd. They came politely. They brought documents, maps, and careful language. They represented a large cattle company out of Cheyenne, along with investors who claimed they wanted partnership, not control. They sat at Ethan's kitchen table, the same table where bank notices had once marked the end of his hope, and spread out papers showing what Red Creek could become. This land could be worth 10 times more. One of them said, tapping the map with a clean finger, "If you let us develop it." Ethan studied the map and studied. They wanted access to the eastern water. They wanted to expand the channels, build holding ponds, increase herd capacity, and turn Red Creek into a major operation. They offered money more than Ethan had ever seen promised in one place. Enough to repair every building, enough to buy more cattle than his father had ever dreamed of owning, enough to make winter fear a thing of the past. Tommy leaned toward the offer more than Ethan expected. "We could do good with that kind of money," he said later when the investors had gone. "We could hire more men, build more barns, buy land before the speculators do." Ethan did not answer right away. He understood Tommy's hunger for growth. The boy had known too much uncertainty too young. A stable ranch, a strong income, a future that did not depend on scraped-together seasons. It was not greed to want those things. But Ayanna said nothing through most of that first discussion. She stood near the window, looking toward the eastern field where Dusty grazed in the late light. Finally, Ethan asked, "What do you think Ayanna turned?" "I think water is not just money waiting underground." Tommy frowned. "No one said it was." "They did," she said softly. "They just used better words." The disagreement did not become a shouting match. That was not how the three of them worked. But the difference sat between them for days. Tommy saw opportunity. Ethan saw security. Ayanna saw warning. One evening, as they stood by the channel where clear water moved through stone, she said, "If you take too much from the land, it won't warn you the second time." Ethan looked down at the water. He wanted to dismiss the words as fear, but he knew better. Ayanna was rarely afraid. And when she was, she had reason. So Ethan investigated. Quietly, he wrote letters, asked questions, rode to neighboring towns, spoke to 2 ranchers who had signed deals with the same company. What he found did not come as a single revelation. It came in pieces. One investor had once held shares in a land concern tied to the same men Caleb Turner had worked with. Another had bought water rights from a family that later claimed they had been misled. 2 small ranches west of Red Creek had entered partnerships, and within 3 years no longer controlled their own wells. Caleb's name did not appear anywhere. But the system had not died with Caleb. It had learned to speak politely. When Ethan told Tommy, the young man went quiet. "They don't break you anymore," Ayanna said, standing beside them. "They make you agree." The final offer came a week later. It was larger than the first, much larger. The investors knew Ethan was hesitating, and they wanted to end the hesitation with numbers. Ethan stood outside the barn that evening with the papers in his hand. Dusty was in the eastern field, standing still in the last gold of the day. She no longer ran when the wind changed. She did not toss her head or paw the ground. She simply stood facing the water, old and quiet, as if she knew a choice had come again. Ethan remembered another paper, another bargain, another morning when he had almost traded away the thing that still believed he could come back. He remembered Caleb's money. He remembered the gunshot. He remembered Dusty stepping between him and death. The next morning, the investors returned. Ethan placed the papers on the table without signing them. "No," he said. One man's smile tightened. "Mr. Cole, you may not see an offer this generous again. I know. You're turning down a fortune." Ethan looked toward the window where the eastern fields shone green under the sun. "No," he said quietly. "I'm keeping one." After that, Red Creek changed again. Not bigger in the way the investors wanted. Better. Ethan expanded the water system, carefully sharing controlled access with small ranches nearby, so they would not be forced to sell during dry seasons. He helped neighbors build catchments and repair ditches. Tommy took charge of much of the work, and in doing so came to understand what Ethan had chosen. One night by the fire, Tommy said, "I thought you were afraid to grow." Ethan smiled faintly. "So did I. But you weren't." "No," Ethan said. "I was afraid of becoming the kind of man who calls taking more the same thing as building." Ayanna, sitting across from them, did not say he was right. She only nodded once. Outside, Dusty stood beneath the fading light, old, and still watching over the field she had led them back to years before. Ethan was no longer merely a man who had survived. He had become a guardian. More years passed. Dusty entered her final season as gently as she had entered Ethan's life. There was no sudden collapse, no violent turn. She simply slowed. Her steps became careful. Her breathing grew deeper after short walks. She spent more time near the eastern field under the cottonwoods by the water. Ethan spent more time with her. He brushed her coat in the evenings, spoke to her while mending tack nearby, and sometimes slept in the barn the way he had after the fire. Though there was no wound now, to clean, no danger to watch for. Only time. Tommy was a man now fully grown, capable enough to run half the ranch without asking. Ayanna remained steady as ever, though silver had begun to thread through her dark hair. Red Creek was strong. The water ran. The cattle thrived. And still, Ethan knew something was coming. Then, one autumn day, a young rider arrived at Red Creek, with a thin horse and eyes full of the same hollow exhaustion Ethan remembered from a mirror years ago. Her name was Sarah Mills. She was barely 20, maybe 21, with dust on her coat, and desperation hidden badly beneath anger. Her family ranch had failed after 2 dry seasons. She owed money. She had come to sell her last horse in Red Creek before heading east to find work. Tommy saw it first. Ayanna saw it too. Ethan looked at the young woman holding the reins of the tired gray gelding and felt the past rise up so clearly it stole his breath. Sarah said, "I heard you buy horses sometimes." Ethan looked at the horse, then at her. "I do," he said. "But not from someone who looks like she's trying to cut out the last piece of herself." Her face hardened. "You don't know me." "No," Ethan said gently. "But I know that look." She turned to leave. He did not stop her. Not with force, not with argument. He simply said, "You're not selling a horse. You're selling the last reason you still believe you can come back." The words were Ayanna's, reshaped by years passed through Ethan's own scars. Sarah froze. For a moment she looked angry enough to spit. Then she looked toward Dusty, standing near the fence, old and quiet, watching. Ethan did not preach. He walked Sarah through Red Creek Ranch, showed her the eastern field, the water channels, the rebuilt barn, the place where fire had blackened the old wood. He told her the story not like a legend, but like a confession. "I almost sold her," he said, nodding toward Dusty. "And if I had, I would have sold more than a horse." Sarah didn't answer that day. but she stayed the night. The next morning, Dusty was found lying beneath the cottonwoods near the water. Ethan knew before anyone spoke. He walked to her slowly, Ayanna and Tommy behind him, Sarah standing farther back with one hand on her gray horse's neck. Dusty lay peacefully in the grass, her breathing shallow but calm. The water moved nearby, clear and quiet. Ethan knelt beside her and placed his hand on her neck. "There you are, girl," he whispered. Dusty's ear flicked once toward his voice. He smiled through tears he did not try to hide. "You brought me home," he said. "More than once." Ayanna stood behind him, silent. Tommy removed his hat. Even Sarah, who barely knew the story, lowered her eyes. There was no panic, no great struggle. Dusty simply breathed, and Ethan stayed with her until she stopped. She passed on the land she had saved. Near the water she had known was there before any of them believed. They buried her under the cottonwoods. Afterward, Sarah did not sell her horse. She stayed at Red Creek to work to learn and to decide what kind of life could still be built from what remained. Tommy became her guide more than Ethan did, teaching her fences, water cattle, and patience. Ayanna taught her to listen before acting. A young foal arrived that spring, rescued from a failed ranch north of the valley. He had a reddish coat and bold eyes, and Tommy joked that Dusty had sent him just to keep Ethan humble. Ethan did not think of the foal as a replacement. Nothing could replace Dusty. But he no longer feared beginnings. One evening, as the sun dropped low over Red Creek, Ethan placed a set of reins in Sarah's hands. "My father told me something once," he said. "A person can lose money, land, luck, almost everything. But they shouldn't lose the horse that knows the way home." Sarah looked down at the reins, then toward the field. Tommy stood by the fence arms, crossed, smiling slightly. Ayanna stood beside Ethan, quiet as the water moving through the land. Sarah mounted and rode slowly into the open grass. The young foal kicked up behind her. The water kept running. Red Creek Ranch glowed under the evening sun, not as a place saved once, but as a place still saving others. Ethan watched until the rider became a dark shape against the gold. Once he had been the man who needed saving. Now he knew the deeper work was helping others turn back before they sold the thing that might still carry them home. One story had ended beneath the cottonwoods. Another had already begun. For me, this story is not only about saving a horse or rebuilding a ranch. It is about the danger of believing the wrong voice when life has pushed you too far. Sometimes people do not lose everything in one dramatic moment. They slowly begin to accept that they are worth less than they truly are. Ethan almost sold Dusty because he thought survival meant giving up the last thing that mattered. But the deeper message is this: when we are exhausted, ashamed, or desperate, we need to be very careful about what we call the only choice. Sometimes the thing we are about to let go of is the very thing still trying to lead us home. Thank you so much for watching and staying with this story until the end. If it touched your heart, please leave a comment and share your thoughts with us. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this. Your support truly means a lot.